Welcome, dear subscribers and curious listeners of my channel. Hogwarts' 4 houses each have their unique qualities, but the Sorting Hat doesn't impose rigid labels on students. If you remember, the Hat struggled for a long time to decide where to place Harry Potter since he combined traits from all the houses. Severus Snape seems like the perfect Slytherin, but if you look closer, many of his actions are much more in line with the spirit of Gryffindor. Today I'll share reasons why Snape could have been a true Gryffindor student. Enjoy watching. Number 1. Fearless resolve. The Gryffindor lion symbolizes unbreakable will, and Snape showed this trait time and again. From the moment Voldemort began targeting the Chosen One, Snape completely changed his priorities. He dedicated every free moment to helping Dumbledore and carrying out the only plan that could avenge Lily. His resolve was captured in the form of his Patronus, which remained the same as Lily's for life. Number 2. Reckless behavior. Gryffindors are known for their tendency towards spontaneous, sometimes downright reckless actions. Though Slytherins are famous for caution, Snape didn't always share that instinct. Remember the pivotal moment when he eavesdropped on Dumbledore and Trelawney's conversation about the prophecy, changing the course of history, and creating the Sectum Sempra curse during his school years shows he wasn't afraid to experiment with borderline magic. A risky move even for an adult wizard, let alone a student. Number 3. Chivalry or something like it. In his youth, before all the tragedies and disappointments, Snape defended Lily with rare determination. He didn't hesitate to snap angrily at Petunia for mocking her sister. Their friendship lasted for years until James Potter's arrogance destroyed what little trust remained. Yet even after they stopped speaking, when Snape learned that Voldemort planned to kill Lily, he did everything he could to save her. He didn't care that they were no longer talking. He acted, risking everything. Number 4. Determination to see things through. Snape knew perfectly well that Voldemort would eventually kill him. Even so, he continued playing his role to the very last breath. In his final moments, he asked Harry to take his most painful, personal memories, not to justify himself, but to make sure the truth finally came out. Thanks to those memories, Harry realized that Snape had spent his whole life trying to protect him from the Dark Lord. Number 5. Courage. Snape was braver than many wizards of his time. Even Harry acknowledged this by naming his youngest son after him. But Snape's courage wasn't flashy. It was deep, grim, and uncompromising. He rushed into the shrieking shack to confront Sirius and Remus. He fearlessly led a double life spying on Voldemort, fully aware of how it could end, and he wasn't afraid to argue with Dumbledore himself. Number 6. Self-sacrifice. Severus Snape chose a life no sane man would envy. He could have hidden after Voldemort's fall. He could have taught potions in peace, never again risking his life. But he went back to the Dark Lord when he returned, wearing the mask of a loyal servant. Every meeting at Malfoy Manor was a gamble. One wrong word, one glance of suspicion, and he would be dead. When Voldemort spoke of killing Harry, Snape's heart never stopped racing. But his face stayed calm. He nodded when the Dark Lord demanded loyalty. He played the part so well that Bellatrix Lestrange sneered, "You are untested, Snape." But Dumbledore trusted him because he saw the truth. Snape was sacrificing everything. He gave up any chance of being seen as a hero. He accepted the hatred of the Order of the Phoenix. He accepted the disgust of the students who whispered he was a murderer. All so that Lily Potter's son might survive. In the end, his sacrifice was complete. Voldemort ordered Nagini to strike, and Snape didn't beg. His last thoughts were not for himself, but for the boy he had protected in secret. "Look at me," he whispered to Harry, wanting to see Lily's eyes one final time. That was a Gryffindor's courage, silent, unyielding, and ready to pay the highest price. Number 7. Loyalty. Severus Snape's loyalty was carved out of grief and guilt. When Lily Evans died, something in him died too. But something else was born, a devotion that never faded. he made a promise to Albus Dumbledore. He would protect her child, no matter what it cost him. He could have walked away. Voldemort returned, stronger than ever. Death Eaters filled every corner of the wizarding world, yet Snape stayed in place. When Dumbledore asked, "Will you give me your word?" Snape's answer was quiet but unbreakable. "Anything," he whispered, and he meant it. Even when he was forced to look into Harry's eyes, so much like Lily's, so painfully unlike hers, he did not falter. His voice could be scathing. "You are just like your father," he spat. But behind the insults he watched over the boy. He kept Voldemort from discovering Harry's secrets. He risked exposure every time he fed information to the Order of the Phoenix. Gryffindors are known for loyalty that outlasts fear. Snape's loyalty was the same, only hidden in shadows. He never needed anyone to know. He never asked for thanks. His devotion to Lily's memory was stronger than bitterness, deeper than pride. It was the last pure thing he carried, and he never betrayed it. Number 8. Ability to admit mistakes. Severus Snape wore pride like armor. His voice dripped contempt. His eyes dared anyone to challenge him. But inside he lived with the memory of the worst mistake he ever made. He had carried Voldemort's prophecy to the Dark Lord, never imagining it would lead to Lily Evans's death. That single act destroyed everything he loved. He never confessed his guilt in grand speeches. Instead, he went to Albus Dumbledore and begged for her life. "Hide them all, then," he pleaded in a raw whisper. "Keep her, them, safe." It was not an apology in words, but in action. When he failed to save her, he did not run. He did not forget. He changed sides and offered his life in payment. For years he walked the halls of Hogwarts, glancing at Harry Potter with a mix of hatred and grief. He could not forgive himself. Every insult he hurled at Harry was also a punishment for himself. Because he saw Lily's eyes looking back at him, a constant reminder of what he had done. Snape's entire life became an act of penance. He never sought praise. He did not expect redemption. He simply chose to make amends the only way he could, by protecting Lily's son to the very end. That brutal honesty about his failure and his refusal to pretend he was innocent took the kind of courage only a true Gryffindor would recognize. Number 9. Loyalty to ideals. Severus. Snape never looked like the sort of man who clung to ideals. His robes were black, his words were cruel, and his past was stained by the dark mark on his arm. But under all the shadows he believed in something that mattered more than safety. He believed some things were simply right. Others were forever wrong. When Albus Dumbledore asked him to protect Harry Potter, Snape did not accept because he hoped for forgiveness. He accepted because he could not bear to watch another innocent life destroyed. "You disgust me," he spat at Voldemort more than once, though never to the Dark Lord's face. He had once chosen the wrong side. He would spend the rest of his life paying for it. In the final months, when Dumbledore's life was failing, Snape still followed the plan. He agreed to kill the only man who trusted him. "Severus, please," Dumbledore whispered. Snape's hand shook, but he obeyed, because the mission mattered more than his revulsion or grief. To the world he seemed a traitor. To Voldemort he played the loyal servant. But in truth, Snape was neither. He was a man who picked a side and refused to move from it, no matter how much it cost. That is the quiet, relentless faith in purpose that any true Gryffindor would understand. Number 10. Contempt for cowardice. Severus. Snape despised cowardice more than almost anything. He never hid this disgust. It showed in the way he looked at Peter Pettigrew. Whenever Pettigrew entered the room, Snape's lip curled in silent contempt. He saw in Wormtail the absolute worst combination, fear wrapped in treachery. When Voldemort praised Pettigrew for his loyal service, Snape's eyes were cold and narrow. He knew loyalty born of fear was worth nothing. Once, in the shrieking shack, Pettigrew whimpered and tried to blame Sirius Black for everything. Snape cut him off with a voice sharp as a blade. "You should have died rather than betray your friends," he hissed. Those words were not Slytherin. They were Gryffindor in their raw demand for courage. Snape's hatred of cowardice extended to his own students. He punished weakness because he feared what it could become. In his classroom, he was merciless with Neville Longbottom, sensing the boy's lack of confidence. But behind that harshness was a fierce belief. Strength must be chosen. No one should crawl when they could stand. He measured people by how they faced danger. Pettigrew failed that test in the most shameful way. Snape never forgave him. He would rather stand alone, hated and doomed, than live as a coward begging for mercy. That was a lion's instinct hidden under a serpent's robes. Number 11, hidden kindness. Severus Snape never wore kindness on his sleeve. He wrapped it in scorn and sarcasm so no one could see the truth, but it was there. During Harry Potter's first Quidditch match, Snape sat in the stands, staring at the boy's broom. His black eyes never moved. Hermione thought he was cursing Harry. She knocked over Professor Quirrell in a panic, but the truth was sharper. Snape was whispering a counter-curse, keeping Harry from falling to his death. When Dumbledore confronted him later, Snape didn't try to take credit. He didn't boast that he had saved James Potter's son. He just said in a flat voice, "I would prefer not to see him die." The words sounded cold, yet they were the only confession he could bear to make. This was his secret mercy, never asking for thanks, never showing the cost of his protection. Years later, when Voldemort seized control of Hogwarts, Snape became headmaster. Many believed he had turned completely dark, but behind closed doors he did everything he could to shield the students from the Carrows. Neville Longbottom told Harry, "Snape was sending kids to detention, not torture. He kept it as mild as he dared." That hidden care kept dozens of children from ruin. No one thanked him for it. Kindness does not always announce itself with warm words. Sometimes it stands in the shadows, silent and fierce. Snape's life was full of moments when he chose to protect rather than destroy. He did it in secret because it was the only way he knew how to be gentle. Number 12, ability to forgive in his own way. Severus Snape's version of forgiveness was unlike anything Gryffindors or Slytherins usually embraced. He never claimed to forget the betrayal of Lord Voldemort, yet he chose to stand against him, driven by a promise to Albus Dumbledore. When Dumbledore asked, "Will you help me protect her son?" Snape didn't hesitate long. He agreed, knowing he would be risking his life. His hatred of Voldemort remained, but he put that hatred to use. Every act of espionage became a strange kind of redemption. Snape never forgave James Potter. That resentment burned too deeply to be erased. James had humiliated him in front of the entire school. Snape's voice had trembled with bitterness when he called James arrogant and self-satisfied. But there was something stronger than hatred. He could not let Lily Evans's child die. Even if the boy carried James's face, the trace of Lily in Harry was enough to keep Severus bound to his secret duty. During the Battle of Hogwarts, Snape's silent loyalty revealed the shape of his strange forgiveness. He could have abandoned the castle. He could have vanished into the shadows. Instead, he stayed. He sent his silver doe to guide Harry to the sword of Gryffindor. "You have your mother's eyes," he whispered with his final breath. In that moment, love outlived hatred. Snape's life proved that forgiveness does not always look like an embrace. Sometimes it is the quiet choice to act against revenge. He would never smile at the memory of James Potter, but he would die protecting James's son. That was the kind of courage only a man who loved deeply could show. Number 13, capacity for great love. Severus Snape's story is usually framed as the tale of a Slytherin whose cunning and ambition ultimately served a greater good, but there is a hidden thread running through every moment of his life that suggests he might have belonged, at least in spirit, among the ranks of Gryffindor. Gryffindors are known for their daring courage and for a love so fierce it overrides fear and doubt, and Snape's undying devotion to Lily Evans embodies exactly that kind of leonine heart. His love was no simple infatuation. It was a consuming, transformative force that shaped every choice he made, long after she rejected him, long after she married James Potter, and even after her death. In Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, Dumbledore's words cut to the core of Snape's character. You are here to learn the subtle science and exact art of potion making. But Snape's life was never merely about potions. It was a quest to redeem himself through the singular, unbreakable tether of love. He had every reason to abandon Lily's memory. From his earliest days, Severus grew up in an atmosphere of neglect and bitterness in the shabby home at Spinner's End. His father, Tobias Snape, was a Muggle man prone to cruelty, and his mother, Eileen Prince, was a witch of frayed spirit and simmering disappointment. Against this backdrop of grimness, Lily's presence was a beacon. Even as children, she represented something bright and unattainable. She was the girl who laughed easily, whose kindness reached out to a lonely boy in patched clothes. Though the Sorting Hat sent Severus to Slytherin and Lily to Gryffindor, the house divisions could not extinguish his attachment. It was this intensity of feeling, this willingness to define himself by love, that echoes the classic Gryffindor trait of devotion, so absolute it defies reason. Throughout his time at Hogwarts, Snape's love remained his hidden anchor, even as his choices pulled him further into darkness. He gravitated towards students like Mulciber and Avery, who dabbled in the dark arts, and he developed a bitter rivalry with James Potter and Sirius Black. But even when pride and anger overtook him, his heart retained that singular, unyielding purpose. In Order of the Phoenix, Harry peers into Snape's pensive and sees a memory of his father bullying the young Severus, a humiliation that sealed Snape's bitterness toward James. Yet the pain never fully displaced the image of Lily. Despite every hurt, Snape's love stayed rooted like a flame guttering but never extinguished. When Voldemort marked Harry for death, Snape's response revealed the true nature of his heart. He went to Dumbledore, pleading for Lily's life to be spared. In Deathly Hallows, he whispers, "Hide them all, then. Keep them safe, please." This was not a calculation or ambition. It was desperation, the instinct of a man whose love outlived hope. Even after she died, the depth of his feeling became something nearly religious. It shaped every facet of his life, turning him into a double agent willing to risk torture and death. No Gryffindor could have shown more loyalty to a cause than Snape did to the memory of Lily Evans. Snape's greatest act of bravery was to spend nearly 2 decades protecting Harry Potter, the living reminder of all he had lost. Every day he faced the boy with Lily's eyes, carrying the silent burden of regret and longing. He did not merely act out of guilt, he acted out of an enduring leonine love that demanded he protect her son, even when it cost him every ounce of pride. In the Philosopher's Stone, he brews the potion that saves Harry from Quirrell's curse. Later, in The Prisoner of Azkaban, he shields the trio from the werewolf Lupin, throwing out his arms though he has every reason to despise them. Each of these actions was an act of quiet, often unnoticed bravery, as worthy of Gryffindor's lion as any act of open combat. The Silver Doe Patronus remains the most haunting symbol of Snape's heart. A corporeal Patronus requires the conjurer to hold on to the happiest memory, the truest essence of self. For Snape, that essence never changed. When Dumbledore asks, "After all this time?" and Snape replies, "Always," it is the single word that defines the man. His love was so constant, so undiminished, that it became his identity. In a world of shifting allegiances and hidden motives, his heart remained bound to one person, and that steadfastness is as Gryffindor as any daring charge into battle. There is a tendency to confuse Gryffindor courage with loud heroics, but courage is often a quiet, stubborn thing. It is the resolve to endure humiliation and suspicion, to face mortal danger without recognition. Snape knew he would never be thanked. He knew Harry would hate him, and that Dumbledore's approval would be fleeting. Yet he continued. In Half-Blood Prince, he performs the most terrible service of all, killing Dumbledore to spare Draco Malfoy and to fulfill the plan that would ultimately defeat Voldemort. This was not ambition but sacrifice. This was love carried to its ultimate conclusion, surrendering every last fragment of dignity to protect a boy who was never his, to honor the woman who once called him friend. Number 14. Ability to act alone. Severus Snape was a man who carved his path through the darkness with no hand to hold. In the candlelit corridors of Hogwarts he passed like a shadow, his black robes billowing behind him, a constant reminder that he was alone by choice. Yet this very choice, this deliberate isolation, echoed something profoundly Gryffindor at its core. Gryffindors were notorious for their readiness to face danger without waiting for the safety of numbers, to leap before they looked if their conscience demanded it. In that regard, Snape was no different from any of the lion-hearted souls who had once walked the same halls. His life was a testament to the courage required to bear the burden of secrecy and scorn when even a shred of companionship might have softened the blows. But he never allowed himself the comfort of sharing his mission with another soul beyond Dumbledore. No whispered confidences, no allies, just the cold certainty that he was right and would pay whatever price justice demanded. Throughout the war against Voldemort, Snape remained an unsung sentinel. The choice to become a double agent was never imposed upon him. He had no obligation to risk his life daily, to play the villain before Death Eaters and the untrustworthy spy before the Order of the Phoenix. When Lily Potter was killed, he could have fled into exile or sought revenge through less treacherous means. Instead, he chose the loneliest possible route. It was a decision born not only from grief and guilt, but also from a bravery most people would have been too brittle to attempt. Gryffindor bravery did not always appear in brilliant displays of sword-waving heroism. Sometimes it looked like a gaunt, unsmiling man poring over potions in the dungeons, pretending to hate the very boy he was sworn to protect. Few understood the nature of Snape's silent sacrifice. Sirius Black, who had plenty of his own recklessness, never trusted him, refusing to see any virtue in Snape's secrecy. Remus Lupin, gentler by temperament, still harboured doubts. Even Harry Potter himself, whose life was saved again and again by Snape's concealed vigilance, only learned the truth in the last bitter hours of Snape's life. "Look at me," Snape had whispered. In his final moments, the words as raw as the wound Nagini's venom had carved in his neck. Those 4 syllables were all he could muster to reveal the ghost of tenderness he had hidden. The irony was cruel. All his years of lonely devotion, and the only absolution he ever received, came when he was dying. In Gryffindor there was a tradition of singular sacrifice. Godric Gryffindor himself was said to have faced enemies alone when allies failed to rally in time. Snape was cut from a similar cloth. Though he bore a Slytherin badge on his robes, he never sought consensus or approval. When he turned away from Voldemort, it was not because others urged him to defect. He did so because he alone decided he could no longer live with the blood on his hands. He stood in Dumbledore's office and declared that he would do anything to atone. No Gryffindor lion could have shown more resolve in that moment. It takes one kind of to fight beside friends, another rarer courage to stand entirely alone in the darkness, your only companion, the knowledge that no one will ever thank you. The war years only heightened the need for his isolation. At any time, Voldemort could have sensed the smallest inconsistency in his allegiances. Had Snape spoken to Sirius or Lupin or even McGonagall about the true nature of his double life, a single overheard word might have shattered the delicate web of lies he spun. So he buried his real intentions beneath layers of disdain and mystery. When Dumbledore asked Snape to kill him, he agreed, knowing it would confirm everyone's worst suspicions. "You disgust me," he had hissed to Dumbledore's face, a calculated performance so convincing that Harry and the entire Order believed it was true. Gryffindors leapt to defend their friends in public. Snape leapt to damn himself to protect them in secret. Even when he taught occlumency to Harry, Snape maintained the mask of hostility. He might have explained the necessity of closing one's mind to the Dark Lord, but that would have required honesty, an opening of the armor he had spent decades forging. So he chose disdain over compassion, loneliness over even the faintest chance of understanding. That decision cost him any chance of reconciliation with Harry, but it was the only way he knew to keep the boys safe. His solitude became a fortress as impregnable as any stone wall. The only other person ever allowed to glimpse inside was Albus Dumbledore, and even he was granted only the minimum needed to steer the war to its end. Number 15, sense of justice. Severus Snape's life was a labyrinth of contradictions, but one thread wound unwavering through the shadows, a profound devotion to justice. This was not the pristine, shining justice that shone from the banners of Gryffindor Tower, nor the soft, forgiving fairness that some professors embraced. His justice was forged in bitterness, refined in secrecy, and applied without apology. When the world closed its eyes to the cost of Voldemort's ascendancy, Snape kept his open. Beneath the darkness of his reputation, there existed a single driving imperative. Evil must be punished no matter the price. His grudge against Voldemort was not a mere personal vendetta. It was the only answer he could give to the theft of Lily Potter's life, to the corruption of every ideal he had once held dear. This relentless compulsion to hold the guilty accountable was as fierce as any Gryffindor's valor. The night Albus Dumbledore revealed the prophecy to Snape, and the name Potter passed Snape's lips to Voldemort's ears, he had not yet understood the scale of the betrayal he would commit against himself. As soon as he realized that Lily was marked, that the Dark Lord intended to slaughter an innocent family to secure his own future, Snape's conscience erupted. This was not simply a fear for Lily's safety, but an instinctive horror that anyone could justify such an abomination. He crawled to Dumbledore, begged for her life, and when his pleas failed, a transformation occurred. In Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, Rowling wrote that Snape's face was white as the ceiling, a man crushed by guilt, yet resolved that no atrocity should go unpunished again. That raw moral fury, though twisted by grief, was the ember of justice flickering in his heart. No one can dispute that Snape loathed Peter Pettigrew with a contempt that surpassed all measure. To Snape, Peter was the ultimate betrayal incarnate, the proof that cowardice could obliterate loyalty. While Sirius Black had been falsely branded the traitor, Snape suspected early on that the truth was uglier. He never forgave Pettigrew for surrendering Lily and James Potter to Voldemort, and his disgust only deepened when the truth finally surfaced in The Prisoner of Azkaban. Even in the Deathly Hallows, when Pettigrew cowered at Malfoy Manor, Snape's cold eyes conveyed nothing but disdain. This was not the Slytherin impulse for self-preservation, it was a Gryffindor's conviction that a betrayer should never be absolved. Snape's punishments were harsh, often merciless, but they were guided by an unshakable sense that certain lines must never be crossed without consequence. His persecution of Harry Potter had layers, jealousy, resentment, and pain, but underlying them was the need to hold Harry's father accountable, if only by proxy. In The Order of the Phoenix, when Harry glimpsed Snape's worst memories in the Pensieve, he saw the seeds of this compulsion, James Potter's bullying, the humiliation Snape endured before Lily's eyes. Yet even this personal bitterness was interwoven with a deeper standard. Snape could not abide injustice, whether from a dark Lord or a golden boy on a broomstick. When Harry's arrogance mirrored James's, Snape responded with severity he believed necessary to prevent the sins of the father from corrupting the son. The most striking proof of Snape's commitment to punishing evil came in the role he accepted as double agent. No coward would have walked willingly into Voldemort's resurrected ranks, knowing that any flicker of doubt could end in a torturous death. Snape risked everything because he believed Voldemort had to be stopped, not merely for Dumbledore's sake, but to restore a balance that had been shattered when Lily died. He told Dumbledore, "I have spied for you and lied for you, put myself in mortal danger for you," a confession that distilled years of peril into a single declaration. He understood that standing idle while darkness rose would be the ultimate betrayal of justice itself. Snape's relationship with Draco Malfoy reveals another facet of his Gryffindor-like righteousness. When Dumbledore ordered Snape to protect Draco, Snape complied, but his actions were not just a fulfillment of a promise. He could see that the boy had been ensnared by Voldemort's manipulations, forced to become a murderer to save his family. Snape's intervention was not only a practical safeguard, but an attempt to spare a child the irreversible burden of taking a life. In Half-Blood Prince, Snape swore the unbreakable vow with Narcissa Malfoy, ensuring that Draco's soul would remain untainted by murder. Though the vow bound him in a trap of impossible obligations, Snape honored it because he could not abide the injustice of Voldemort's cruelty preying on the young. Snape's greatest act of justice unfolded in the darkness of the Astronomy Tower. Dumbledore, weakened and dying, asked Snape to end his life. In that final moment, Snape's hatred of cruelty and exploitation demanded that he obey Dumbledore's last request. To deny the headmaster mercy would have been an act of cowardice. His hand trembled as he raised the wand, but when the green light erupted, it was not only the killing curse, it was a Gryffindor's final proof of loyalty to principle over comfort. He committed an unforgivable act to protect Draco, maintain the war's strategy, and uphold the pact he had made in the name of something greater than himself. The same determination pulsed through Snape's efforts to protect Hogwarts students during the Carrows regime. Though he wore the mask of Death Eater headmaster, he covertly shielded the children from the worst of the Carrows' sadism. Neville Longbottom would later recall how Snape's presence, grim as it was, prevented more frequent tortures. The students did not see it, but Snape was practicing a ferocious hidden justice, defending the vulnerable from the strong, no matter how it blackened his reputation. In this, he proved that bravery and fairness are sometimes invisible to those who benefit most from them. Number 16, Stubbornness. Severus. Snape's life unfolded like a dark tapestry, woven with threads of obsession, sacrifice, and a peculiar kind of valor that no one quite expected. His unshakable stubbornness often stood as the hidden force behind his choices, the anchor that kept him from drifting into cowardice or apathy. When Albus Dumbledore entrusted him with the task of protecting Harry Potter, Snape accepted not because he admired the boy, but because he could not betray the promise he had made to Lily Evans. This singular decision, clung to with the determination of a man who could never let go, illuminated the core of Snape's character. He was not merely cunning or ambitious in the way a Slytherin might be, he was steadfast to the point of self-destruction. His unrelenting spirit echoed Gryffindor's most essential virtue, the refusal to abandon a path once it was chosen, no matter how perilous or thankless. Even when the entire wizarding world branded him a traitor, Snape's resolve did not waver. He held fast to the disguise Dumbledore had crafted, a mask so convincing that almost every member of the Order of the Phoenix doubted him. Remus Lupin, a man who had known Snape since their school days, could only watch with mingled suspicion and bitterness. Yet Snape persisted, accepting scorn as if it were the tax he must pay for the luxury of his unyielding commitment. In Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince, Ruling writes, Severus Snape looked as though he had been asked to empty his pockets in front of the entire school for some deeply humiliating purpose. His refusal to protest his innocence revealed a stubborn acceptance of isolation. That same refusal, that unwillingness to ease his burden by appealing for pity, bore the mark of a Gryffindor's obstinate courage. When Draco Malfoy became tangled in Voldemort's cruel machinations, it was Snape's determination that shielded the boy from certain death. Narcissa Malfoy had pleaded with him in the gloom of Spinner's End, extracting the unbreakable vow that would force Snape to carry out Dumbledore's death if Draco could not. Only a man of fierce conviction would ever bind himself to such a vow, aware that it would damn him in the eyes of all who fought for the light. This was not the Slytherin's brand of cautious self-preservation. It was something closer to Gryffindor's reckless loyalty. Snape's obstinacy was so absolute that he refused to compromise with his conscience or permit himself the easy exit of denial. The vow was proof. He would not allow his chosen path to bend, even when it became unbearable. There were countless moments when Snape might have fled. He might have slipped into the night, vanishing like so many Death Eaters who sensed the war's turning tide. Yet he stayed, locked in his dual role as Dumbledore's confidant and Voldemort's trusted advisor. In Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, Voldemort praises him, "You have been a good and faithful servant, Severus." But Snape knew these words were no shield against suspicion. He remained, nevertheless, driven by a single, stubborn imperative to protect Lily's son and honor. Her memory. It was not ambition that carried him through the years of deception. It was a refusal to surrender his purpose, no matter how bleak the cost. Snape's work as potions master also exposed his unrelenting temperament. He labored over each antidote and draught with a precision bordering on mania. During Harry's 6th year, Snape brewed the draught of living death with such mastery that Slughorn himself acknowledged its excellence. But behind the meticulous craft lay the same dogged willpower that shaped every facet of Snape's life. He could not tolerate imperfection in himself, nor allow his duties to slide into mediocrity. His stubborn insistence on absolute standards was, in its way, a Gryffindor's refusal to abandon ideals, even if those ideals were measured in cauldrons and ingredients rather than gallant quests. When the moment finally came for Dumbledore to die, Snape's obstinacy was tested to its limits. Standing atop the astronomy tower, wand raised, he faced the man who had been his mentor and judge. It was no simple act of mercy. It was the culmination of years of unbending resolve. In that moment, when he cast the killing curse, he did not flinch or falter. His heart was an anvil upon which the hammer of duty had struck again and again. His eyes, as described in the book, were full of revulsion and hatred, but there was no retreat. He had chosen this role, accepted its ugliness, and could not be dissuaded. His unyielding nature had become both his greatest strength and his greatest torment. Even as he lay, dying on the floor of the shrieking shack, Severus Snape's mind did not wander from his purpose. He pressed his memories upon Harry with a trembling hand, determined that the truth be known. He did not waste his final breaths begging forgiveness or justifying his decisions. He simply fulfilled the task he had clung to with unshakable tenacity. This last act was perhaps the most Gryffindor of all, the certainty that the mission mattered more than any hope of vindication. "Look at me," he whispered, so that Lily's green eyes would be the last thing he saw. Even as the darkness closed around him, he remained bound to the vow that had defined his existence. It is easy to mistake Snape's cold demeanor for indifference, but that was a facade. Underneath, there pulsed a fierce, uncompromising will. He was, in many ways, the lion in serpent's clothing, so unwilling to abandon his purpose that he allowed the world to despise him rather than deviate from it. McGonagall herself, who had once condemned Snape for his cruelty, later spoke of him with reluctant respect. She understood that few wizards possessed the fortitude to live as he had, wearing the mask of the enemy while protecting those who never suspected his sacrifice. His stubbornness was not always noble. There were moments it revealed a dark, vindictive edge. His treatment of Neville Longbottom, whose boggart took the form of Snape himself, showed how his rigid temperament could harden into cruelty. Yet even this flaw arose from the same core trait. He could not or would not temper his convictions with mercy. To be Severus Snape was to live without compromise for better or worse. This is why he stands apart from the calculating Slytherins who prized self-interest above principle. Snape's principles were his prison, but he never tried to pick the lock. During the final battle, Snape was the only one to remain in Voldemort's inner circle while still working to protect Hogwarts from destruction. He passed false information at great personal risk, undermined the Carrow's brutal regime, and ensured that the students did not suffer more than necessary. When the time came to flee, he did so only because Voldemort commanded him to. His escape was no act of cowardice. It was a calculated step to stay close to the Dark Lord, even as he knew that his death was all but certain. It takes a peculiar kind of bravery to walk knowingly toward your own doom, simply because you refuse to betray the cause you chose. In Gryffindor House, students learned to prize bravery over all else, to stand their ground when the world pressed against them. Snape embodied that ethos in ways his schoolmates could never have predicted. He may have worn green and silver as a boy, but his heart was shaped by an ironclad defiance that belonged to the red and gold. His life is proof that the Sorting Hat, in its wisdom, sometimes places a student not in the house that reflects their soul, but the one they need to survive. For all his ambition, it was Snape's inexhaustible stubbornness, his refusal to surrender his mission, that made him, in spirit, a lion among serpents. Number 17. Honor. Severus Snape's code of honor was as cold and unyielding as the dungeons he haunted, yet it was unmistakably real. His entire life was defined by a vow that chained him to a path of relentless sacrifice, and in this he mirrored the fiercest of Gryffindors, those who swore oaths that burned them alive inside. When Albus Dumbledore pressed him for loyalty, Snape did not simply agree to aid the Order of the Phoenix out of some fleeting guilt for Lily Evans's death. He bound himself with a promise so severe that it consumed his soul, declaring, "Anything." This single word was not cowardice or calculation, but a blood pact made in spirit, the kind of vow Godric Gryffindor himself would have respected. Snape upheld that promise even as it required him to kill the only man who trusted him. He lived with the weight of that unholy task, knowing no absolution would come. It is easy to mistake Snape's bitterness and cruelty for proof that he lacked Gryffindor's famed honor. Yet his brand of honor was not the bright, shining chivalry of fairy tales. It was a blackened, battle-worn standard he refused to lower, even when doing so would have freed him from pain. In Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallow, when Dumbledore instructed him to protect Harry Potter at any cost, Snape protested only out of cold logic, recognizing how cruel fate had been in asking this of him. But when the choice was laid bare, he never truly refused. Even after Dumbledore's death, when Harry was alone in the world, Snape kept watch over him, providing the Sword of Gryffindor when Harry needed it most. He might have hated Harry, but his promise was stronger than hate. One cannot forget the moment in The Prince's Tale when Snape reveals to Dumbledore that he wishes to keep his protection of Harry secret even from Harry himself. He knew Harry would loathe him. He knew no forgiveness awaited him. Dumbledore questioned his motives, saying, "You disgust me." Yet Snape only demanded to know, "Have you grown to care for the boy after all?" Dumbledore replied that Snape's feelings for Lily remained his only reason. And Snape accepted that condemnation without argument. He did not ask for his record to be cleaned, for his actions to be excused. He bore the stain of his past without evasion. Gryffindor honor does not mean pretending to be good. It means never lying to yourself about your failures. Snape never denied his own. Even his unrelenting cruelty toward Harry was part of this grim code. He despised what Harry represented, the face of James Potter, his old enemy, the man who humiliated him, the man Lily chose. Yet Snape did not allow those feelings to sabotage his duty. He protected Harry even as he insulted him, even as he tried to toughen him, even as he made Harry's life miserable. This was not kindness, but it was consistent with a Gryffindor-like sense of harsh, unrelenting justice. Snape had vowed to keep Harry alive, not to spare his feelings. He would never have pretended to care for Harry in order to ease his own conscience. Such a lie would have been easier for him, but Snape refused it. When Draco Malfoy was ordered to kill Dumbledore, Snape's honor demanded he shoulder the burden himself. He did not kill for pleasure or advantage. He killed to spare Draco from becoming a murderer. In Half-Blood Prince, when Dumbledore said, "Severus, please," Snape's response was not triumphant, but tortured. The narrative describes his expression as full of revulsion and hatred, at the act itself, at Dumbledore for asking it, at himself for agreeing. He did not hide behind rationalizations. He killed because he had sworn he would. Gryffindor's courage is not about joy in violence, but in accepting responsibility for impossible choices. Snape embodied this dark bravery more than many who wore red and gold. There is something fearsome in the way Snape kept secrets that condemned him in the eyes of the world. He could have told the Order the truth about Dumbledore's death, absolved himself, revealed his role as Dumbledore's agent. But he did not. He remained Voldemort's trusted spy, living every day with the knowledge that his allies would kill him if they learned his true allegiance. "I have spied for you and lied for you, put myself in mortal danger for you," he reminded Dumbledore once. And Dumbledore acknowledged it. Yet Snape accepted the role of traitor to the light so that he could work in darkness. A Gryffindor's code does not demand applause or gratitude. It demands that one does what is right, even at the cost of reputation, even at the cost of soul. Snape's memories, shown to Harry in the final book, reveal a man who never forgave himself. He saw his betrayal of Lily Evans as the crime of his life. He did not beg Harry for understanding or attempt to make Lily's death about his own suffering. He did not say, "I loved her, so forgive me." Instead, he showed Harry what needed to be known, no more, no less. The memory of Lily calling him Severus in the old days was painful, a relic of who he had been before he allowed darkness to claim him. He did not expect that pain to cleanse him. Gryffindor honor is often lionized as blindingly pure, but real honor is willing to acknowledge corruption without demanding to be washed clean. Snape understood that. His final acts were not glorious. Mortally wounded by Nagini, Snape knew that Voldemort had won, unless Harry learned the truth. His last thoughts were of Lily's eyes. He demanded that Harry look at him, not for vanity, but because he wanted to see in Harry the one fragment of goodness he still cherished. He forced Harry to take the memories, to understand the full horror and necessity of what had to be done. He did not comfort Harry. He did not ask for pity. He died in pain, but with his promise fulfilled. This bleak commitment is honor in its most brutal form. Snape's harsh sense of justice also aligned him with Gryffindor's values in unexpected ways. When he punished students, it was often cruel, but it was never random. He detested favoritism when others practiced it. Despite his own notorious bias towards Slytherins, he was furious at Harry for rule-breaking, not because he was a hypocrite, but because he had once been the boy who broke rules and destroyed lives in doing so. He saw in Harry the arrogance that had led him to become a Death Eater. In Order of the Phoenix, when Harry insists Voldemort is possessing him, Snape does not show pity, but immediately offers occlumency training, even when it humiliates them both. He would not let Harry's pride endanger the mission. Snape was also capable of surprising acts of fairness towards students outside Slytherin when his code permitted it. He was hard on Neville Longbottom, not out of casual sadism, but because Neville reminded him of his own failures, nervousness, incompetence, a boy who could have been the prophecy's target. Yet Snape brewed Neville's grandmother's potion himself in Prisoner of Azkaban when needed. He bullied Hermione Granger, but he also acknowledged her intelligence grudgingly by setting her near the front of the class, where he could test her, push her. He was the worst kind of teacher in many ways, but he was not unjust in his assessments. He demanded precision and excellence. His cruelty was a twisted form of rigor. One cannot overlook the fact that Snape volunteered to become a double agent at all. In Deathly Hallows, Dumbledore reminds him of his reason for turning spy. "You do not care for the cause, the only thing you care about is Lily Evans." Snape does not deny it. But caring for one person enough to risk everything is, in its essence, Gryffindor courage. He went to Voldemort knowing the penalty for failure was torture and death. He gave false information to the Dark Lord for years. He stood in Voldemort's presence, legitimacy and suspicion everywhere, without ever faltering. Such nerve, such absolute refusal to break, is exactly what Gryffindor prized, even if Snape wore green instead of red. Snape's interactions with Dumbledore further show a Gryffindor-like moral absolutism. He was disgusted when Dumbledore proposed raising Harry as a pig for slaughter. He did not let Dumbledore's wisdom or age silence his outrage. "You have been raising him like a pig for slaughter," he spat in fury. This was not the language of a coward or sycophant, but of a man who held a line even his commander could not cross. Gryffindors were known for questioning authority when their principles were offended. Snape had those same unyielding convictions, even if they made him brutal and difficult. When Harry finally views Snape's memories in the Pensieve, the boy learns the truth about a man who never asked for redemption. Snape's Patronus, a silver doe like Lily's, was the perfect metaphor for his code of honor. It was unchanging across decades, even as everything else fell apart. Dumbledore recognized it instantly. After all this time? Always. That was not romantic sentimentality. It was testament to a promise kept through humiliation, through hatred, through death. Gryffindor honor does not demand that you forget your failures. It demands you act anyway. Snape did. There is no denying Snape was cruel, petty, vindictive, but honor does not require kindness, it requires constancy. He did not rewrite his past. He did not beg forgiveness. He knew the shape of his own sins and bore them like armor. In his world of spies and murderers, he remained true to a single vow. That vow destroyed him, but he never let it go. When others faltered, when even Dumbledore wavered, Snape held his course, knowing it would lead to his ruin. Such savage integrity is not soft or pretty, but it is, undeniably, Gryffindor. Snape did not live for glory, for the House Cup, for the admiration of his peers. He did not want Harry to know the truth until it was too late to matter. His sacrifice was not designed to redeem himself in anyone's eyes. It was made because he had once made a promise. Gryffindor's lions are known for charging into battle for honor's sake. Snape fought a war of poison and shadow, but the motive was the same, a line he would not cross. Even Voldemort, the master of manipulation, could not break that line. In the end, Severus Snape's sense of honor was twisted, grim, and inescapable. He was not a hero in the traditional mold, but he lived by a code as strict as any knight's. He did not forgive himself for what he had done, but he refused to betray the trust he had accepted. In a world where it was easy to lie, to excuse oneself, to seek pity, Snape chose truth, and that truth was hard, ugly, and absolute. It is there, in the ruin of his life and the starkness of his promise, that one can see why he might have worn Gryffindor's colors. He did not live kindly, but he lived with honor, and he died for it. Number 18, willingness to be misunderstood. Severus Snape never wore bravery like a medal, never sought applause or admiration. He was a man defined by shadow and ambiguity, but in that darkness burned a fire worthy of any Gryffindor. When Dumbledore first approached him with the horrifying truth about Voldemort targeting Lily Potter, Snape's desperate plea was not for himself, but for her safety. In Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, Rowling writes of his anguish, hide them all then, he begs. But when his actions ultimately led to her death, he didn't seek forgiveness or pity. Instead, he chose the most punishing path imaginable, a life of penance in service to the memory of a woman who would never forgive him, doing the right thing in secret, knowing it would never be enough. That readiness to live with guilt without hope of redemption is not merely Slytherin cunning or self-interest, but the essence of Gryffindor courage, a willingness to sacrifice personal comfort for a higher cause, even if no one ever knows. His entire role as Dumbledore's double agent was built on being hated and mistrusted. Even those he served most would not understand him. Harry saw him only as cruel, vindictive, unfair, a man who seemed to take pleasure in punishing him. Snape never corrected the boy's view, never tried to win him over. Instead, he accepted the poison of Harry's contempt as the necessary price of his vow to protect him. The Gryffindor ideal isn't about grandstanding, but about doing the right thing, even when everyone boos. Snape's entire life became a testament to that unappreciated heroism, showing a bravery that needed no witnesses. Dumbledore understood this bitter reality more than anyone. He demanded of Snape an impossible task, to kill him in front of all Hogwarts, to ruin his name, to destroy every shred of goodwill he might have had left. Snape did not argue the morality of it in terms of his own reputation. He did not seek loopholes or mercy. He accepted with stony finality that he would become the most hated man alive to fulfill a greater plan. "Severus, please," Dumbledore whispers. And Snape does it not out of love for Dumbledore, but out of grim duty to the mission they share. That act wasn't cold calculation alone. It was the Gryffindor ideal, stripped of romance, choosing to be the villain for the sake of others. Consider the night he delivered the sword of Gryffindor to Harry in the forest. He could have left Harry to his fate. Instead, knowing he could not be seen helping, Snape used his Patronus, a silver doe, an unmistakable sign of his love for Lily, to lead Harry to the weapon that would defeat Horcruxes. He did not expect thanks. He did not want Harry to know that was the point. His every move was cloaked in contempt and obscurity so the plan would work. Gryffindors are praised for charging in with swords drawn, but Snape's sword was subtlety sharpened on sacrifice. He risked Voldemort's wrath if discovered. He risked Harry's hatred regardless. He did it anyway. This same readiness to be misunderstood was not a single act, but a lifetime of them. He accepted the job of Hogwarts' most loathed teacher, enforcing Voldemort's cruel rules to maintain his cover. He gave detention to students he secretly wanted to save. He turned away from any show of kindness because it would undermine the lie he needed Voldemort to believe. Snape did not indulge in cruelty because he enjoyed it alone, though he certainly had a vicious tongue. He used it to hide, to shield, to keep the mask unbroken. For Gryffindors, the temptation is to throw the mask aside and roar. For Snape, the real courage was in keeping it on. When Harry views Snape's memories in the pensive, the reader witnesses the terrible cost of that life. Lily's eyes, the same eyes Harry carried, were a perpetual reminder of what he had lost and could never make right. Rowling describes the memory of Snape cradling Lily's lifeless body as the scream he could not stop. That grief became his entire motivation. He did not want power or reward. He wanted to make the world less vulnerable to the evil that had killed her. He wanted to keep her son alive, even if that son hated him. That is not ambition for the sake of it. It is not self-preservation. It is service, and that is at the very heart of Gryffindor valor. Snape's work as a spy was the most dangerous job imaginable. At any moment, Voldemort could have peered into his mind and discovered his duplicity. Snape knew the risk. He knew the punishment. He practiced occlumency to a terrifying degree of mastery, turning his own mind into an unbreakable vault. This constant vigilance was not for his own survival, but for the success of the Order of the Phoenix. He risked the Cruciatus Curse, exposure, death, and did it all alone. His colleagues could never fully trust him. Even the Order doubted him. Yet he persisted. That is Gryffindor bravery with the mask of Slytherin cunning, but the bravery remains the core. He also carried out acts of mercy even in the middle of war. During the Battle of Hogwarts, Snape tried to avoid harming students, despite his role as headmaster under the Carrows. He allowed members of the Order to escape. He tried to preserve what little he could of the school. He walked a razor's edge between maintaining his cover and limiting harm. For someone like Snape, whose every action had to appear cruel or calculating, these small mercies were acts of defiance no less real than any shouted challenge. Snape also bore personal humiliation without complaint if it served the mission. He allowed Sirius Black to go free despite his hatred. He accepted Dumbledore's rebukes without defending himself. He even tolerated Bellatrix Lestrange's accusations of disloyalty and proved himself with cold precision. In Half-Blood Prince, Rowling shows him refusing to justify his motives even to those who might have understood. But I do not like to talk about my plans, Bellatrix. This secrecy was not only about deception but about protecting the plan. Gryffindor courage often means charging headlong into danger, but for Snape it meant standing still while the world misread him. The greatest evidence of his Gryffindor-like courage was his final act. Even as Voldemort prepared to kill him, Snape did not beg. He did not try to save himself. His only concern was getting Harry the truth. Dying on the floor of the shrieking shack, he forced out the demand, "Take it! Take it!" He gave Harry the memories that would ensure Voldemort's defeat. He did not confess, did not seek Harry's forgiveness, did not even apologize for the lifetime of cruelty. He simply did what had to be done. That was not self-serving Slytherin ambition. It was pure, harsh, unflinching sacrifice. And in those memories he gifted, Harry saw not only Snape's love for Lily, but also the unrelenting price he had paid. He saw the boy who had lost her friendship through one hateful word. He saw the man who turned spy for Dumbledore's sake. He saw the teacher who fought to keep Harry alive while insulting him at every turn. Harry's own understanding transformed in that moment, recognizing the courage it had taken to be so utterly despised while working for good. Dumbledore's words echoed with new meaning. Sometimes we must choose between what is easy and what is right. Snape had always chosen what was right, even when it was the hardest path. Snape's story also reveals the tragedy of being a hero in silence. While Gryffindors like Harry and Hermione got medals, applause, and friendships forged in battle, Snape got none of it. He was left with his bitterness and his grief. He was buried without honor. Even Harry's final gesture of naming a son after him, Albus Severus, who was named for 2 headmasters of Hogwarts, felt like a small, belated mercy for a man who had spent his life ensuring Harry would survive to give that name. Gryffindor courage is supposed to win glory, but Snape's won only silence. For all his Slytherin cunning and bitterness, Snape's moral code was unbending. He would not betray Dumbledore's plan. He would not let Harry die unprepared. He would not abandon the fight even when it meant killing the only man who had trusted him. That was not driven by personal gain, but by duty to the fallen and the living. His readiness to be misunderstood was not weakness, but the very steel of his soul, hammered into shape by regret and love. Gryffindor bravery is often depicted in roars and sword fights, but Snape's bravery was in the unremarked endurance of pain for others. Snape was not a kind man, nor was he fair. He was vindictive, petty, cruel. Yet none of that diminished his sacrifice. In many ways it made it more impressive. He had no saintly temperament to soften the edges of his burden. He had to fight his own rage, his own envy, his own cruelty every day, choosing to serve despite them. It would have been easier for him to give in to Voldemort fully, to accept power and prestige. Instead, he chose to fight and to be hated for it. That inner war is Gryffindor's challenge in its rawest form. Snape's entire arc is one of deliberate self-condemnation for the sake of others. He was willing to be hated so Harry could live, willing to be feared so Hogwarts could remain protected, willing to be damned so Voldemort could be defeated. In the end, his legacy is not the green of Slytherin alone, but a deep, scarlet courage that went unrecognized in life. He became the villain so others could be heroes, and that, more than any sorting hat declaration, proves why he could have worn Gryffindor's colors with grim, unflinching honor. Number 19, capacity for compassion. Severus, Snape's story was stitched together by contradictions, a man who wore cruelty like a second skin, but who harbored a compassion so fierce it shaped the course of the wizarding world. When the sorting hat debated placing him in Slytherin, it could just as easily have found in him the daring heart of a Gryffindor, had it peered more deeply into the folds of his battered spirit. Snape understood the agony of loneliness, and this understanding bled into every act that others mistook for callousness. In the dim corridors of Hogwarts, his black robes billowed behind him, a warning to all who dared cross his path, yet within those same walls he fought relentlessly to spare Draco Malfoy from the crushing burden of murder. Albus Dumbledore himself entrusted Severus with the most terrible of charges, to end his life so that Draco's soul might remain unbroken. It was an act requiring more courage and compassion than any public victory. The image of Snape towering over Neville Longbottom, his face twisted with disdain, was etched into the memories of countless students. But beneath the scorn lurked a bitter fear that Neville, the shy boy who often stumbled in potions class, might have been the one marked by Voldemort's prophecy. In the pages of Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix, Dumbledore explains to Harry that it was only a matter of circumstances that singled out Harry instead of Neville. Snape, haunted by the wreckage his own choices had caused, could never look at the round-faced boy without tasting the metallic tang of dread. If Voldemort had chosen differently, Neville would have been the target, Lily Potter might have survived, and Snape's guilt would have been woven in a different pattern. His apparent cruelty toward Neville was born not only from Slytherin prejudice, but from a dread so profound he could not bear to acknowledge it openly. In the shadows of the Astronomy Tower, when Severus lifted his wand against Dumbledore, there was no triumph in his expression. The very lines of his face sagged with grief, the knowledge of what he must do carved into the hollows beneath his eyes. "Severus, please," Dumbledore had whispered, and in that moment Snape's hand did not tremble because it was fortified by a compassion too great to allow Draco to commit the killing blow. Few could have shouldered that responsibility. Fewer still could have walked away from the lifeless body with the knowledge that they were saving a boy they had once scorned. Such sacrifice was not the hallmark of ambition alone. It required the kind of reckless bravery Gryffindor valued above all else. Every time Snape shielded Harry Potter from the fatal curses of Death Eaters, he was, in his own caustic way, honoring the memory of Lily Evans. He never permitted himself the balm of kindness toward the boy, because kindness would have cracked the dam of grief holding back his sorrow. When Professor Quirrell first attempted to kill Harry during a Quidditch match, Snape counter-cursed the jinx, silently guarding the life he once wished had never been endangered. "I knew you were a dangerous fool," he later snarled to Quirrell. But the truth was simpler. Snape would rather be despised by the world than allow Lily's son to die while he yet drew breath. In this, he shared a kinship with the Gryffindor spirit, a capacity for fierce, protective love that would drive a man to sacrifice his own peace. Even his relentless bullying of students like Hermione Granger was complicated by a twisted, unspoken desire to prevent them from meeting the same fate he had. He despised her eagerness because it reminded him of himself, the clever, isolated boy who had turned to darkness in search of power and validation. Severus saw in Hermione a mirror of his own brilliant but unguarded mind. Rather than encourage her, he cloaked his concern in cruelty, a warped effort to toughen her against a world that would punish her for her gifts. In Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, he deducted points and mocked her ceaselessly, yet he never permitted genuine harm to touch her. His compassion was a blade with no hilt, cutting everyone who came too close. Severus Snape's deepest compassion was reserved for the memory of Lily, the single luminous bond that survived his descent into darkness. His love was not the gentle affection of a schoolboy, but the consuming, ruinous devotion that can burn a life hollow. When Voldemort decided that the child of Lily and James Potter must die, Snape fell to his knees and begged for her life. Even then, he could not plead for James, nor for the baby Harry. "Hide them all, then," he said, but the desperation in his voice betrayed the truth. Lily was the only soul he could not bear to lose, and when she was lost to him forever, his existence became an act of penance, a grim testament to the compassion that had survived everything else. His role as a double agent demanded a courage few could comprehend, but it also required an unyielding compassion for a world that would never thank him. Each day he walked into the Great Hall, he wore the mask of a Death Eater, earning the loathing of colleagues and students alike. Beneath that mask, he carried the burden of secrets that might have destroyed them all had they fallen into the wrong hands. He saved countless lives by feeding Dumbledore fragments of Voldemort's designs, risking torture and death with every whisper he shared. The Gryffindor courage to face dragons paled beside the quiet heroism of facing Voldemort's wrath unarmed. When he ordered Harry to look at him in the last moments of his life, his eyes were not those of a bitter Slytherin, but of a man who had loved too well and lost too much. "Look, me," he gasped, and it was not Harry he wanted to see, but Lily's green eyes, the only memory that had ever softened the iron of his will. That last request, so intimate and unguarded, revealed the depth of a compassion that had shaped every choice he made. The world would remember him as a tyrant in the classroom, but that final moment stripped away every disguise. There was compassion in the way he fought to protect Draco Malfoy's innocence, refusing to let a 16-year-old boy become a killer. Draco had been groomed to believe that murder would prove his loyalty to Voldemort, yet it was Snape who intervened, ensuring that Draco would never cross that final damning line. No one applauded Snape for saving Draco, just as no one praised him for saving Harry time and again. His compassion was never performed for an audience. It was a private, terrible duty he accepted because no one else would. Snape's hatred of Sirius Black was undeniable, but even that feud was tempered by a deeper purpose. When Sirius escaped Azkaban, Snape's obsession with capturing him masked a genuine fear for Harry's safety. In Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban, he prowled the halls, convinced Sirius would strike at the boy. His fury in the Shrieking Shack was not solely the bitterness of old rivalry, but the horror of believing that Lily's son was once again in mortal danger. His compassion for Harry was never clean or gentle. It was an acid that corroded every other feeling until nothing remained but duty. He never permitted himself the luxury of forgiveness. His compassion did not absolve him. It only deepened the wounds he carried. He could not forgive James Potter for the humiliations of their youth, nor could he forgive himself for the choice that doomed Lily. But his inability to forgive did not erase the fact that he had spent nearly 2 decades ensuring that no other mother would weep as he had wept. Gryffindor bravery often celebrates grand gestures and noble speeches. Snape's courage was the quieter, crueler kind, the courage to bear unending grief in silence. In every sneer and cold rebuke, there was a man who believed that compassion required ferocity. He taught Harry how to close his mind to Voldemort's influence, not with patience, but with the merciless discipline he had learned under duress. In Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix, Snape forced Harry to relive his most painful memories, believing that only by hardening him could he survive the war to come. His methods were harsh, but his intent was the same that drove Gryffindors onto the battlefield, to protect those who could not yet protect themselves. When Voldemort's snake struck, Severus did not curse the world or rail against his fate. He accepted death as the final payment in a ledger that had long since emptied him of hope. In those last seconds, as his blood darkened the floorboards, he thought only of Lily, of the promise he had kept, and the boy he had saved. He did not die with the smug satisfaction of a Slytherin who had outwitted his enemies. He died as a man whose compassion had cost him everything, and who chose that cost willingly. Severus Snape was not a Gryffindor in name, but he possessed a heart that had risked more than most could ever fathom. His story proved that compassion, even when hidden beneath cruelty, can be the most dangerous and powerful force of all. Number 20, hatred of hypocrisy. Severus Snape might have worn Slytherin colours all his life, but his spirit harboured a fire as unbending and scalding as anything Gryffindor could have claimed. He hated hypocrisy so much it scarred him. In the dungeons he ruled like a tyrant. He offered no comfort of polite lies. When students trembled before him, they knew he would not soothe them with platitudes. He punished Gryffindors harshly, not because he was deceitful, but because he was petty and human, yet he never pretended otherwise. His disdain for the grinning masks of his fellow Slytherins was palpable. He would have chosen any day the raw, unpolished honesty of Minerva McGonagall over the silky sycophancy of Lucius Malfoy. Rowling wrote of his sallow skin and cold voice, but those traits were more honest than the smiling cruelty of others in his house. When Albus Dumbledore asked him to turn spy against Voldemort, Snape didn't spin tales of honour or chivalry. He admitted the truth. He had brought about Lily's death. "Hide them all, then," he pleaded in The Prince's Tale, and when Dumbledore challenged his remorse, Snape's answer was raw and unfiltered. I wish I were dead." There was no attempt to paint himself as a hero. Gryffindors, for all their brashness, could respect that. He owned his shame without disguise. He wore it like a hair shirt, visible to anyone who chose to look. Snape's open contempt for Death Eaters who fawned over Voldemort showed just how little patience he had for performative loyalty. He sneered at the likes of Bellatrix Lestrange, who bled fanaticism from every pore, never pausing to question the gleeful sadism of her cause. He had no tolerance for Dolohov, who maimed and killed for sport, nor for the Carrows, who revelled in cruelty while chanting slogans of purity. Snape may have joined Voldemort once, but he spat on those who pretended the Dark Lord's reign was anything noble. He did not polish lies to justify his choices. That refusal to pretend is a cornerstone of the Gryffindor temperament. The Gryffindors were accused of recklessness, but they cherished truthfulness over cunning. Snape's moral compass was crooked but never hidden. In Half-Blood Prince, when Harry hurled the word coward at him, Snape's reaction was not to lie or smooth it over, but to rage with the fury of someone who knows precisely what he has risked. "Don't call me coward," he thundered, and the words were pure Gryffindor in their rawness. He could endure being called evil, cruel, even traitor, but not coward. It was one of the few insults that could truly draw blood, because he knew he was brave, and he would not let anyone pretend otherwise. Among Slytherins whose defining trait was ambition served with calculated self-preservation, Snape was an anomaly. He betrayed Voldemort at the cost of his life. No bargain, no insurance policy, no exit strategy. He played the double agent not for glory or power, but because it was the only penance he believed he deserved. There was no secret agenda to rule at Voldemort's side or claim riches. In Deathly Hallows, Voldemort himself says of Snape, he has been most useful. Yet Snape's usefulness lay in his honesty. He did not play both sides for advantage. He played both sides to save a boy who reminded him of everything he had lost. When others in Slytherin basked in the safety of collective ambition, Snape chose isolation. He made no friends among Death Eaters. He refused to laugh at their jokes. Bellatrix questioned his loyalty precisely because he did not flatter Voldemort or kiss his robes. He despised her unthinking devotion. "You do not seek his approval?" she asked suspiciously in Spinner's End. Snape lied strategically to preserve his cover, but there was no love in his voice. There was only cold calculation to serve Dumbledore's goals. Even in deception he offered no emotional pretense. That too was Gryffindor, the refusal to pretend at friendship where none existed. Snape's teaching style, harsh and biased as it was, still betrayed a core of brutal honesty. He did not coddle. He told Neville Longbottom flatly that he was incompetent. He belittled Harry's fame without subtlety. Unlike Lockhart, who plastered over failure with fake charm, Snape forced his students to confront their shortcomings. It was ugly, sometimes cruel, but it was real. Gryffindors value that kind of truth, even when it stings. He would rather a student hate him for telling them the harsh truth than love him for lies. Perhaps the most telling example of Snape's hatred of hypocrisy was his relationship with Dumbledore. He did not worship the headmaster. He respected him, yes, but he fought with him constantly. He questioned his orders. He raged against being asked to sacrifice even more. In The Prince's Tale, Snape's words burn with fury. "You have used me." He did not flatter Dumbledore or pretend to be grateful for his role. He knew what Dumbledore was, a man who asked the impossible, demanded loyalty unto death, and calmly planned a child's demise. Snape called that cruelty by its name, even as he obeyed. Contrast this with Lucius Malfoy, the consummate Slytherin. Lucius played both sides, but always for advantage. When Voldemort fell, Lucius slithered back to the Ministry, all apologies and donations, pretending to be respectable. When Voldemort returned, he bent the knee with flowery speeches of loyalty. Snape, by comparison, burned all bridges. He chose a single, unyielding path. There was no lie in him about where he stood once he chose. He was a Death Eater. Then he was Dumbledore's man. That was it. No changing sides to save himself. No hypocrisy. Even his final moments show that hatred of falsehood. When Voldemort demanded the Elder Wand's allegiance, Snape did not beg. He didn't lie about who he was. He offered no protests that he was truly loyal. Rowling writes that his black eyes widened as he understood his death was upon him. He died without pretense, leaving Harry with the truth in a single desperate act of giving memories. "Look at me," he whispered, needing that truth to be seen. That naked honesty, even at the end, was Gryffindor bravery in its most harrowing form. Snape's relationship with Lily Evans was another crucible of his disdain for hypocrisy. He loved her fiercely, honestly, even when it destroyed him. He could not pretend otherwise. When he called her mudblood, it was an ugly betrayal, but he didn't lie about it after. He did not make excuses to her face. He accepted her disgust. He lived the rest of his life owning that failure. Where another might have lied to ease his conscience, Snape refused to give himself that comfort. He accepted the truth that he had damned himself. In Order of the Phoenix, when Sirius mocks him about courage, Snape's sneer is particularly telling. He does not respond with words of self-defense. He lets Sirius think him cowardly because he will not reveal the dangerous truth of his mission. That silence is not hypocrisy. It is sacrifice. He refuses to polish his image even for someone he despises. He knows Sirius would not believe him anyway. Rather than lie, he accepts Sirius's scorn as part of his penance. Throughout the war, Snape risked torture and death at Voldemort's side without promise of glory. He did not boast to Dumbledore about his bravery, he simply did it. When Harry accused him of enjoying Lily's death in The Prince's Tale, Snape's horror was absolute. He did not justify, he showed. The Doe Patronus, emerging silently and luminously, said everything he refused to say aloud. That was Snape's honesty, refusing easy words in favor of actions that could not be faked. Snape's story is one of refusing to let himself off the hook. Gryffindors do not shy away from consequences. When others plotted how to avoid punishment or shift blame, Snape walked willingly into danger. He cursed his own soul with an unbreakable vow to protect Draco, knowing it would kill him. Not for power, not for applause, simply because it had to be done. That same fierce, uncompromising sense of duty defined so many Gryffindor heroes, from Harry to Neville. For all that the hat placed him in Slytherin, Severus Snape lived a life that spat on the safe hypocrisies of that house. He was a man who would tell the truth, even if it damned him, act without hope of forgiveness, and hold himself accountable when no one else did. The hat may have seen cunning in that young boy's eyes, but it missed the iron truth burning behind them, a truth that might have made him, in another life, one of Gryffindor's own. Number 21, Endurance of Pain. Severus. Snape's life was a tapestry of relentless endurance, a testament to a kind of courage few dared to acknowledge. While the Sorting Hat declared him a Slytherin, some threads of his story gleamed with the fierce resilience more fitting for a Gryffindor. Even from his earliest years, Snape was no stranger to suffering. He grew up in a home shadowed by neglect and conflict, where the thin walls of Spinner's End could not muffle the sounds of Tobias Snape's bitterness. This was where Severus first learned to lock his pain away, to let it harden into an armor around his heart. In that cramped house, the boy who would later intimidate Death Eaters began his apprenticeship in quiet, unbreakable endurance. Though many remember his cunning and ambition, they often forget that these qualities were shaped in tandem with a capacity to survive emotional wounds that would have crippled lesser spirits. When Severus arrived at Hogwarts, the castle's turrets must have seemed like the ramparts of some long-awaited refuge. But Sanctuary proved elusive. He was marked by poverty and by his sullen manner, easy targets for the cruel humour of wealthier, bolder boys. Sirius Black and James Potter singled him out with relentless glee, transforming the school corridors into gauntlets of humiliation. In Order of the Phoenix, Sirius once called him Snivelus, with open contempt, a nickname that carried the sting of every slight he had suffered since childhood. Yet despite these public degradations, Snape never broke entirely. He did not collapse under the weight of ridicule. Instead, he found purpose, channeling his wounded pride into mastery of the dark arts and the subtle intricacies of potions. He might have wielded his learning as a weapon, but the roots of his determination were planted in the very soil of suffering. It was this refusal to be shattered that signaled the first embers of a Gryffindor spirit smouldering in the depths of his soul. The years that followed, dark as they were, showcased a stoic endurance worthy of any lion-hearted student. Snape's decision to join the Death Eaters was born of youthful anger and a hunger for belonging, but the eventual price of that allegiance was more than any ordinary man could bear. When he discovered that the prophecy he had carried to Voldemort would be used to target Lily Evans, he faced the knowledge that his actions had set in motion the destruction of the only person he had ever loved without reservation. In the Deathly Hallows, when Dumbledore asks whether he grew to care for Harry, Snape unleashes a torrent of anguish as he conjures the Silver Doe, crying, "Always!" That single word revealed the vast continent of grief he had traversed alone. To love Lily in secret, to serve her memory without hope of forgiveness, this was no Slytherin scheme. It was the sort of sacrifice that required a strength even the bravest seldom summon. Even Voldemort, master of cruelty, recognized the potency of Snape's hidden pain. To maintain his cover as a loyal Death Eater, Snape endured the Dark Lord's cold regard, the humiliating interrogations that tested every fracture in his spirit. Voldemort never truly trusted anyone, and Snape least of all, yet the potions master met his gaze without flinching. In The Half-Blood Prince, when Bellatrix Lestrange demanded to know where his loyalties lay, Snape faced her scorn with an almost regal composure. Such endurance did not arise from cunning alone. It came from a willingness to let his body and heart be marked by suspicion and loathing so that his purpose could remain intact. Like a Gryffindor knight kneeling before the sword, he accepted the agony as a condition of his vow. Within the walls of Hogwarts, Snape's daily life became a study in unacknowledged suffering. He bore the contempt of nearly every colleague. Minerva McGonagall regarded him with wary distaste. Phileas Flitwick seldom concealed his disapproval. Even the kindly Pomona Sprout spoke of him in cautious tones. Yet no judgment wounded him so deeply as the gaze of the students. To them, he was a figure of menace, a villain cloaked in black. Harry Potter's loathing was the cruelest irony of all. The boy he protected was also the boy who despised him most. When Harry peered into the pensieve in the Order of the Phoenix, he saw the memory of Snape's humiliation at James Potter's hands, a wound that never healed. But even then, Snape did not lash out with the full force of his bitterness. He contained it, allowing only a flicker of rage to surface. That restraint was itself an act of courage, proof that he could have inflicted far greater harm if he chose. Instead, he chose endurance. One of the most telling moments came during Dumbledore's final months. The headmaster, already weakened by the curse that clung to his withered hand, asked Snape to undertake the unthinkable, to be the instrument of his death. Dumbledore's voice, though frail, carried the force of a command, and Snape did not shrink. He agreed, though the task devoured him from within. In The Half-Blood Prince, Rowling writes, there was revulsion and hatred etched in the harsh lines of his face. No Slytherin calculation could erase the cost of that promise. When he raised his wand against the only mentor who had believed in his redemption, he did so with a steadiness that bordered on the heroic. To end Dumbledore's life was not an act of treachery. It was an acceptance of unbearable pain for a greater cause. That acceptance was Gryffindor in spirit, if not in name. Throughout the Second Wizarding War, Snape lived as a man divided. Every dawn was an exercise in discipline, to put on the mask, to endure the jeers of Death Eaters who suspected his loyalties, to protect students in secret while appearing to tyrannize them in public. He was both jailer and guardian, enemy and ally. In the Battle of Hogwarts, when chaos reigned and the castle shook with detonations of curses, Snape continued to act according to his singular mission. He sought out Voldemort, not in hope of mercy, but because he knew the end had come. When Nagini struck, it was not cowardice that filled his eyes, but the weary acceptance of a man who had given all he had to give. His last thoughts were not of ambition or revenge, but of Lily's eyes reflected in her son's face. Though many would say his bitterness and cruelty disqualified him from Gryffindor's legacy, those same qualities arose from the unrelenting pressure of his inner torment. He was a man who never allowed himself to surrender to despair, no matter how tempting oblivion must have seemed. His entire adult life was a trial of endurance, a ceaseless test of willpower. He remained on his feet while the world he knew dissolved around him, while the lines between good and evil blurred to the point of madness. It takes lion-hearted fortitude to bear that burden without collapsing. Consider the moment when Snape, bleeding onto the floor of the shrieking shack, fixed his gaze on Harry with a final, desperate urgency. He commanded Harry to take his memories, to understand the truth of his long vigil. There was no self-pity in that last act. Only the stubborn insistence that his sacrifice be known, that Lily's memory not be consigned to oblivion. In The Deathly Hallows, as Harry pressed the flask to Snape's lips, the dying man summoned the last reserves of his strength to force out a whisper. That was not Slytherin cunning, but the final flicker of a heart that had withstood decades of grief without succumbing to it. It is worth remembering that Gryffindors are defined not by their immunity to fear, but by their willingness to endure it. Snape's fear was profound and manifold: fear of discovery, fear of failure, fear of the moment Lily's son would die as a result of his mistakes. Yet he never allowed that fear to dictate his choices. He endured ridicule, suspicion, and hatred because the alternative, to abandon his mission, was unthinkable. No lion ever held the line with more silent fortitude. Perhaps the clearest example of this endurance can be seen in his unrelenting protection of Draco Malfoy. While Voldemort turned Draco's task into a spectacle of terror, Snape offered the boy the one mercy he could, a promise to do what Draco could not. This was not ambition, it was compassion. He agreed to shoulder the blame, to be forever condemned as Dumbledore's killer. That choice required a surrender of pride and a tolerance of moral agony that only the strongest could endure. In the end, it was Snape's unbreakable devotion that defined him, not his cunning. He never asked for thanks, never sought absolution. He bore his pain with a stoicism that even Godric Gryffindor would have respected. The House of Lions might not have been the Sorting Hat's verdict, but in the chambers of Severus Snape's heart, a quiet, indomitable courage was always roaring. Number 22, ability to see the truth. Severus Snape spent much of his life wearing the mask of a Slytherin, cold, calculating, and driven by ambition. Yet buried beneath the layers of bitterness and regret lay a quality that could have made him a worthy Gryffindor: his relentless ability to see the truth, no matter how bitter it tasted. While the House of Godric Gryffindor is most often associated with roaring courage and chivalry, it is also the domain of those brave enough to confront reality without illusions. Snape proved again and again that he could pierce the comforting veils of propaganda and self-deception. When Tom Riddle rose to power as Lord Voldemort, countless witches and wizards were enthralled by his talk of blood purity and the promise of magical supremacy. Even many pure-blood families who should have known better succumbed to that poisonous rhetoric. But Snape, despite pledging himself to the Dark Lord, never truly swallowed the fantasy that Voldemort's cause was noble. He understood that beneath the slogans lay only a hunger for dominance, a disregard for life, and an obsession with fear. He demonstrated this clarity in Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows when he risked everything to bring Dumbledore crucial intelligence about Voldemort's plans. No ambition or cunning could explain that choice. Only the willingness to face what Voldemort really was and the courage to act upon that knowledge. Snape's capacity to see truth extended beyond his appraisal of the Dark Lord. Many respected Albus Dumbledore as the infallible champion of the light, a man beyond reproach or error. Yet Snape recognized the reality others could not admit. Dumbledore was capable of manipulation and sacrifice in pursuit of what he judged the greater good. Snape alone knew that Dumbledore intended to let Harry march willingly to his death. He did not shy away from this truth, nor did he idealize it. When the revelation came, Snape's reaction was not one of blind devotion, but of shock and reluctant acceptance. The moment when Dumbledore confessed that Harry must die was among the most chilling in the series, and Snape's response was a testament to his unvarnished vision. He demanded to know if Dumbledore had been raising Harry like a pig for slaughter. His voice was shaking, and he called Dumbledore out in a way no one else dared. The Gryffindors were known for their defiance, but Snape embodied a subtler, lonelier kind of rebellion, the refusal to be deceived by a mentor's legend. This same clear-sightedness shaped his understanding of Harry himself. In the early years, Snape treated Harry with scorn and hostility, seeing in him only the arrogant echo of James Potter. But over time, evidence mounted that Harry was not his father reborn. In the Order of the Phoenix, when Snape taught occlumency, he glimpsed memories of the boy's suffering and vulnerability. Though he never admitted it aloud, he knew Harry was more than the sum of James's mistakes. In the final book, Snape's protection of Harry was not based on affection, but a sober comprehension of duty. He knew the boy was the key to Voldemort's downfall and, more importantly, the last living connection to Lily Evans. He could not pretend that Harry was expendable. He would not let his personal hatred blind him to the reality of what Harry represented. This ability to distinguish between truth and prejudice was rare among the adults in Harry's life. While others projected their fears and hopes onto Harry, Snape saw the simple, uncomfortable fact. He was a child, caught in a war he did not choose. In moments when fear and sentiment clouded others' judgment, Snape's eyes remained clear. When Narcissa Malfoy begged him to make the unbreakable vow, he did not protest that Draco might still be saved from becoming a killer. He knew the truth. The boy was already ensnared, and Voldemort would punish failure without mercy. Snape did not pretend that the war was fair or that a happy ending could be guaranteed. His decision to accept the vow was born of an unflinching realism. He understood that protecting Draco would cost him dearly, yet he stepped forward without illusions. That was not the behavior of a cowardly man clinging to safety, but of one willing to pay the price that truth demanded. Snape's unwavering commitment to the truth made him a singular presence among Dumbledore's allies. Where others whispered about Voldemort's Horcruxes in terrified speculation, Snape insisted on concrete evidence and action. He accepted the horrifying reality of the Dark Lord's immortality long before the rest of the Order could bring themselves to discuss it. In The Half-Blood Prince, he prepared Draco's mother by stating simply, "The Dark Lord has ordered the boy to kill me." This was not a boast or complaint. It was a statement of fact. The clarity of his language was almost shocking in its cold honesty. It was the voice of a man who would not hide behind comforting half-truths. This same honesty extended to himself. Unlike many who deluded themselves about their motives, Snape never allowed sentimentality to cloud his assessment of his own soul. When Dumbledore offered him redemption after Lily's death, he accepted not out of some abstract repentance, but from the blunt recognition of the consequences of his choices. "I have spied for you, and lied for you, put myself in mortal danger for you," he reminded Dumbledore. He never claimed to be noble. He never sought forgiveness. His actions were driven by the recognition that he had helped create the world that had destroyed the only person he ever loved. That acceptance of guilt and responsibility required a courage that many Gryffindors, with their easier faith in good and evil, never had to find within themselves. Snape's capacity to see the truth also shaped his final sacrifice. As he lay dying in the shrieking shack, he did not ask Harry for absolution. He did not try to rewrite the story of his life. He simply gave Harry what he needed, the memories that revealed the reality behind the war, the purpose of his existence, and the nature of Voldemort's last weakness. Snape's final words were not a plea for redemption, but an act of lucid necessity. "Look at me," he said, needing only the witness of Lily's eyes one last time. That moment was not sentimental. It was a man, stripped of every illusion, facing the end without pretense. His vision of the world was as merciless as it was clear. Snape did not believe in the neat dichotomy of good and evil that so many Gryffindors embraced. He saw that Dumbledore's strategies could be as ruthless as Voldemort's ambitions. He knew that love could curdle into obsession, and that bravery often walked hand in hand with cruelty. That was why he refused to flatter Harry with false comforts or easy praise. He respected the boy enough to let him see the ugliness that came with war. This unsparing honesty was a gift, even if it came wrapped in scorn. When Harry later named his son Albus Severus, He acknowledged that Snape possessed a courage few could fathom. But beneath that tribute lay a deeper truth. Snape's defining quality was not just bravery. It was the refusal to pretend. He never allowed himself the luxury of comforting lies. He could see Voldemort's megalomania behind the mask of ideology, Dumbledore's pragmatism behind the facade of benevolence, and his own failures behind the excuses he might have made. In a world where even the bravest often clung to illusions, Snape stood apart. That was a kind of heroism that no Sorting Hat could have foreseen. In The Prisoner of Azkaban, when Snape confronted Sirius Black, he did so with an almost feral intensity. Yet even then, he knew that vengeance was not the whole story. He could have let Sirius die, but when the moment came, he did not turn away from the truth. The boy he loathed had saved them all. In his own grudging way, he honored that reality, though he could not forgive it. Gryffindors were praised for their readiness to act, but Snape showed a more subtle kind of valor, the capacity to restrain himself when rage threatened to consume judgment. One could argue that Gryffindor House might have offered Snape a place where his uncompromising honesty could flourish without becoming cruelty. But in Slytherin, this same honesty was twisted by bitterness and envy until it became a weapon. Yet no matter how poisoned his spirit became, the faculty to see the truth remained unbroken. It was the thread that tethered him to his humanity, even as he sank into darkness. Perhaps the most poignant proof of Snape's clear vision was his understanding of Harry's isolation. Despite all the disdain he showed, Snape knew what it was to grow up unloved, to be measured against the expectations of others. When he looked at Harry, he did not see a hero or a threat, but a boy marked by a destiny he never asked for. The empathy was hidden, but it existed. That recognition, free of sentiment, free of pity, was a form of respect. In a world overrun by legends and propaganda, Severus Snape remained, to the end, a man who saw things as they were, and it was this singular clarity that, more than any other trait, made him worthy of the Lion's House. Number 23. Loyalty to memory. Severus Snape's life was a testament to the dangerous, consuming power of memory and loyalty, qualities that Gryffindor House prized as much as any daring act upon the battlefield. Though the Sorting Hat placed him in Slytherin for ambition, cunning, and resourcefulness, there burned in him a kind of lion's fire, one that refused to forget, refused to surrender the promise he had made, even when it destroyed him from the inside. When he showed Albus Dumbledore his silver doe Patronus, identical to Lily Potter's, he revealed the truth of his undying devotion. "After all this time?" Dumbledore asked. "Always," Snape replied. This moment was not about romance, but about an unbreakable vow to a memory, to the dead, and to his own sense of penance. It is the same quality that sent Gryffindors like Neville Longbottom to place the Sorting Hat on his head, even when surrounded by Death Eaters. They remember the fallen, they refused to let them be forgotten, and in that Snape was perhaps one of the bravest of them all. Snape's Patronus never changed, though he lived for decades after Lily's death. Unlike others whose hearts might move on, whose souls might heal or redirect themselves, he carried that silver doe like a wound that never closed. In Deathly Hallows, when Harry understands the meaning of that Patronus, it is like seeing Snape's soul laid bare. This act was not for glory or for reward. He didn't hope Lily would see it, or that anyone would praise his loyalty. In that sense it was selfless, a deeply Gryffindor virtue. He bore the weight of memory alone, in silence, even as he risked his life spying for Dumbledore. Gryffindors honor the dead by carrying their stories forward, refusing to let them be erased. Snape did that every day by ensuring Harry's protection, even though Harry was the child of the man he hated most. His fidelity to Lily's memory superseded everything. Memory, for Snape, was an oath. When he heard of the prophecy and carried word to Voldemort, he didn't care about the Potters. But when he realized Lily was in danger, he begged for her life. When she died anyway, something in him broke so completely that it became his purpose to make amends. Dumbledore recognized it, using that sense of responsibility to turn Snape into a double agent. Yet it was Snape himself who chose to stay in that role, constantly risking torture, death, and exposure. He didn't do it out of love for the Order of the Phoenix or the light side of magic. He did it because he refused to forget what he'd done, refused to abandon the vow he made to himself over Lily's grave. It was an oath as strong as any wizard's magical binding promise. Gryffindors are known for their unshakable oaths. Think of Sirius Black, who escaped Azkaban for Harry. Think of James Potter, who died shielding his family. Snape too died for the memory of Lily. One of the defining Gryffindor traits is courage in the face of certain doom, and Snape's entire adult life was a study in that virtue. He didn't just wear the mask of a Death Eater while feeding Dumbledore information. He did so knowing Voldemort would kill him if discovered. Every occlumency lesson with the Dark Lord was a battle for his life. Every whispered warning to the Order was a gamble that he wouldn't be exposed. He never relented, he never tried to run away. It is the kind of mad, doomed heroism that the Sorting Hat praises in Gryffindor House. And all of it was for the memory of someone who was gone, who would never thank him, who would never forgive him, who would never even know. That is faithfulness of the highest order. Snape also had the Gryffindor trait of refusing to betray his ideals even when it cost him everything. He despised James Potter. He despised Harry for looking so much like James. Yet he saved Harry over and over. He brewed wolfsbane for Remus Lupin despite his disgust for werewolves. He gave crucial information about Sirius Black's return. He shielded the students of Hogwarts from Carrow cruelty when he was headmaster, walking a tightrope of complicity to spare them worse punishment. In Deathly Hallows, McGonagall even notes how the Carrows were furious with Snape for interfering with their torture of students. These were acts of courage that didn't serve his personal ambition, but honored the memory of Lily Potter, who would have wanted children protected. Gryffindors don't just fight for friends, they fight for the helpless. Snape did that too. There is also the notion of Gryffindor loyalty, not just to people but to principles, even painful ones. Snape's principle was a promise to the dead, one he kept even though it destroyed his reputation. To the world, he was a traitor, a murderer, Voldemort's man. To most of Hogwarts, he was cruel, untrustworthy, unfair. He let that lie stand. He didn't try to explain himself. He didn't protest the world's condemnation. He accepted hatred as the price of keeping his promise. In The Prince's Tale, we see that he and Dumbledore planned his final murder in advance, so Draco wouldn't have to do it, so Voldemort would trust him fully. It was the ultimate act of self-sacrifice, without the hope of absolution. This is the kind of painful, ugly heroism Gryffindors understand best, the willingness to be hated forever, to do what must be done. It is important to see how Snape's memory of Lily was not a mere obsession. It became his moral compass. He was not by nature a good man. He was cruel to students, harsh, often petty. But he knew the difference between good and evil. He chose to oppose Voldemort, the man who killed Lily, no matter what it cost. Even when Dumbledore scolded him for caring only about Lily, Snape eventually came to see the larger picture. He protected Harry because it was right, even when he disliked him. This painful growth is the mark of someone determined to honor the dead not just with words but with deeds. Gryffindors prize that above almost anything. Snape's willingness to live with pain rather than forget it is also deeply Gryffindor. Many people would try to heal, to let go of grief. Snape refused. He held on so tightly to the memory of Lily that it warped his entire existence. It wasn't healthy, but it was loyal in a way that can't be denied. When others would move on, he kept fighting the same war inside himself. He let the pain remind him of what he owed, of what he'd done wrong, of what he had to atone for. In this way, he was like the Gryffindor veterans who can't let go of the fallen comrades they left behind. They keep the dead alive in memory, even when it costs them peace. One of the most moving parts of Snape's story is that he didn't just remember Lily as an ideal. He remembered the complexity, the girl who defended him, the friend he drove away, the woman who rejected his path. He remembered his own culpability in her death. He did not rewrite history to make himself blameless. That honesty in remembering is also a Gryffindor trait. Think of Harry's refusal to forget Cedric Diggory even when it hurt to remember. Think of his willingness to call Voldemort by name. Snape's memory of Lily wasn't comfortable or easy. It was raw, painful, and true. The image of Snape conjuring his Patronus for Dumbledore is one of the most haunting scenes in the series because it lays bare how much a single memory can define a life. "Always," he said. That single word explains everything. It is the cry of someone who will not break his promise no matter the years, no matter the suffering. It is the kind of loyalty that Gryffindors sing about in their common room, the kind that fuels legends. Even if Snape didn't look like a typical Gryffindor hero, that moment revealed the lion's heart beneath the Slytherin robes. Snape's life can be read as a tragedy precisely because he embodied such fierce loyalty to the dead while alienating the living. He could have chosen to betray Voldemort and flee. He could have bargained for safety. He could have turned his back on Hogwarts entirely. Instead, he stayed to the bitter end, dying in the shrieking shack, so that Harry could learn the truth in time. His entire arc is that of a man who refuses to forget a single promise. He never let himself off the hook. Gryffindors understand the cost of such vows. It is also worth remembering that Gryffindors are often defined by their worst impulses as much as their best. James Potter was arrogant. Sirius Black was reckless. Snape's vices, cruelty, bitterness, pettiness, were part of that same package. But like those other Gryffindors, he was capable of enormous courage. He walked into Voldemort's presence daily while feeding him lies. He manipulated the most dangerous dark wizard of the age. He stood on a razor's edge for nearly 2 decades without falling. That is bravery of the rarest kind. We should also see that Snape's sacrifice was not clean or saintly. He didn't forgive Harry. He didn't make peace with himself. He died in fear and pain, hated by most of the people he helped save. He didn't get a funeral like Dumbledore's. He wasn't remembered with statues or songs. That is very Gryffindor, the kind of sacrifice that expects nothing in return. Like Colin Creevey charging into battle despite being told to stay home, Snape went into the heart of danger, knowing he would die and that few would even understand why. Snape's fidelity to Lily's memory gave him a purpose he would not abandon. Even when Dumbledore warned him he was raising Harry like a pig for slaughter, Snape rebelled. He demanded to know if there was no other way, revealing his own moral outrage. He did not blindly obey. He challenged, he questioned, and finally he delivered the truth to Harry himself. Gryffindors do not make obedient soldiers. They make warriors who question orders when they seem wrong. Snape had that same fire. In the end, Snape's legacy was carved in silence. No one knew the full truth until Harry saw his memories. When Harry named his son Albus Severus, he was acknowledging that Snape had shown the highest form of bravery, loving the dead enough to protect the living. Harry even said, "He was the bravest man I ever knew." That line is not just forgiveness, it is recognition of kinship. For all his Slytherin cunning, Snape had a Gryffindor heart that never let the dead be forgotten, that kept its vow until his last breath. Number 24, capacity for great pain in service of a great cause. Severus Snape's life was a tapestry of silent heroism, woven with the blackest threads of personal sacrifice, each decision a testament to a capacity for pain that rivals anything Gryffindor House ever demanded of its greatest champions. He was sorted into Slytherin for his ambition and cunning, but beneath the green and silver colours burned a Gryffindor's heart, willing to endure unbearable suffering in the name of protecting others. He spent years cultivating the perfect lie, the unrelenting mask of the Death Eater who had returned to Voldemort's service, while secretly working to ensure that Harry Potter would live to end the Dark Lord. Every day was a risk, every conversation with Voldemort a dance along the razor's edge. The boy who had once dreamed of glory was instead condemned to drudgery and scorn, yet he bore it with grim pride, determined that the world would never see the truth he guarded like a dragon over its hoard. He accepted a life of hatred with clear-eyed commitment. The students at Hogwarts viewed him as a bully, colleagues treated him with suspicion or dislike, and even Albus Dumbledore, his only confidant, could offer him no real solace, only purpose. He endured it all. J.K. Rowling writes in Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, Snape's face was very white and contorted. His black eyes were fixed upon Dumbledore's, full of hatred and revulsion, yet unable to kill. That moment in the Astronomy Tower wasn't just the death of Albus Dumbledore, but the death of Snape's last hope of ever escaping his role. He killed the only man who knew the truth about his mission, ensuring that he would carry the unbearable burden alone. It was a Gryffindor's kind of bravery, stripped of glory, performed in shadow. The depth of his sacrifice reveals itself fully in the memory Harry watches in the Pensieve. There we see Snape pleading with Dumbledore to protect Lily Potter's son. Not because he cared for Harry himself, he never did, but because he could not live with the idea of her death being truly meaningless. Dumbledore asks him, "After all this time?" And Snape answers simply, "Always." That single word exposes the great raw wound at the center of Snape's existence. Love turned into penance. He chained himself to the cause of Voldemort's destruction out of a sense of obligation and guilt that never faded. In this, he mirrored the Gryffindor ideal of choosing to suffer for the good of others, even when the others didn't understand, appreciate, or forgive. Snape's courage didn't lie in impulsive heroics, but in deliberate suffering. He accepted the role of a double agent, knowing that discovery meant certain death. He let Voldemort's inner circle believe he had murdered Dumbledore out of loyalty, so that when the time came to lie about Harry's burial in the Forbidden Forest, Voldemort would trust him. He didn't just risk his life once or twice. He lived in the certainty that each day might be the day Voldemort finally questioned him too closely, demanded an answer he could not give, read something in his mind he could not conceal. And yet he never faltered. This is courage in its rawest form, the willingness to be tortured indefinitely for the chance of saving lives. The hatred Snape earned from Harry was part of that sacrifice. He could have made the boy's life easier. He could have treated him with something approaching kindness. But Snape feared that even the smallest hint of favoritism would reveal his true allegiance. So he hardened his heart and made himself cruel, ensuring Voldemort would never suspect that he cared whether Harry Potter lived or died. In the Deathly Hallows, Voldemort calls Snape the only Death Eater I ever feared, and for good reason. Snape was a master of occlumency and deception. He weaponized his reputation for coldness, building a fortress of disdain around himself that kept suspicion at bay. In this he was like a Gryffindor knight donning black armor to infiltrate the enemy's castle. When Harry finally learns the truth, the image of Snape changes entirely. The Pensieve reveals Snape's long vigil over Harry's life, the protective spells he cast, the arguments he had with Dumbledore over putting the boy at risk. It shows the grief that choked him when he found Lily dead, the way he cradled her body, promising to do anything to stop Voldemort. Snape's entire life after that moment became an act of atonement, but not one that sought absolution. He never tried to explain himself to Harry, never demanded forgiveness or recognition. His self-inflicted punishment was to endure a life of contempt without protest. Gryffindor courage is often defined by the willingness to die for others. Snape's courage was the willingness to live for them in constant agony. Snape even accepted Dumbledore's plan to die by his own hand. The headmaster understood that his death would serve several purposes: protecting Draco Malfoy from becoming a killer, ensuring Voldemort's trust in Snape, and setting in motion the final act of Harry's sacrifice. Snape agreed, knowing it would make him a murderer in the eyes of everyone. When he cast the killing curse, he destroyed the last relationship he had left. Even Dumbledore saw the cruelty of what he was asking, but Snape accepted it because he believed there was no other way. He wasn't just brave enough to die, he was brave enough to die hated. One of the most striking examples of Snape's Gryffindor-like fortitude is seen in his treatment of Harry's occlumency lessons. He loathed Harry, but tried to teach him to guard his mind against Voldemort nonetheless. He had no patience for Harry's failures, and his cruelty made the lessons a misery. But he kept trying until Harry violated his privacy by diving into the pensieve. It was then that the last fragile thread between them snapped. Even so, Snape returned to the mission Dumbledore gave him, never allowing his bitterness to interfere with the larger goal. He accepted the destruction of his own soul for the sake of a world he no longer believed would thank him. His final moments in the Shrieking Shack are a portrait of unbearable sacrifice. Nagini's attack left him dying in agony, and his only thought was to give Harry the last pieces of the puzzle. He forced out the words demanding Harry take his memories, ensuring that the truth would not die with him. It wasn't mercy for himself. He didn't beg Harry to forgive him or even to understand him. He only cared that Harry would know what he needed to defeat Voldemort. Even in the moment of his own death, Snape was thinking of how to help win the war. This is precisely the kind of self-annihilating purpose that the bravest Gryffindors hold sacred. His entire life, Snape was trapped in a cycle of loss and regret. He betrayed Lily by delivering the prophecy, then tried to undo the consequences at the cost of his humanity. He joined the Death Eaters out of ambition, then spent the rest of his life killing that part of himself. He chose to live with the worst version of his own story because that lie kept people safe. Gryffindor bravery is often romanticized as the charge into battle or the defiance of an evil tyrant. Snape's version was uglier, harder, and far less likely to be celebrated. Yet it was courage all the same. Dumbledore recognized Snape's brand of bravery. He trusted Snape with the most sensitive secrets of the Order of the Phoenix. He made Snape promise to kill him when the time came. He asked him to protect Harry until the last possible moment. He told Snape that he had grown to care for the boy after all, and Snape's furious denial, for him, only underlined the truth. He didn't care for Harry as himself, but he cared for him as Lily's son. This wasn't about personal affection. It was about fulfilling a promise no matter the cost. Dumbledore may have exploited Snape's guilt, but he did so because he knew Snape would never break. Even Voldemort feared Snape's mastery of the mind. Occlumency isn't just a skill, it's a discipline requiring constant vigilance and emotional control. Snape had to smother every instinct for self-preservation, every flicker of panic, to convince Voldemort that his loyalty was genuine. He lived under the eye of the world's greatest legilimens for years. Any slip would have doomed him, and Harry, and everyone else. Gryffindor bravery often glories in its recklessness. Snape's was a study in careful, suffocating restraint. He didn't act without thinking. He thought constantly and acted anyway. Harry himself ultimately recognizes this when he names his own son, Albus Severus, telling him, "You were named for 2 headmasters of Hogwarts. One of them was a Slytherin, and he was probably the bravest man I ever knew." It's the final vindication of Snape's sacrifice. Harry sees, at last, that the man he hated gave everything to defeat Voldemort, without hope of reward or thanks. Snape chose to be hated, so the world could be free. That is a Gryffindor-worthy legacy, even if the Sorting Hat never saw it. Snape was no saint. He was petty, cruel, vindictive, and profoundly bitter, But heroism isn't sainthood, it's choosing to do what's right despite who you are. Snape's moral ugliness made his sacrifice more powerful, not less. He wasn't a natural Gryffindor, but he was a man who chose a Gryffindor's death in life because it was the only way he could pay for his sins. He understood the cost of his choices and embraced them without complaint. That, in the end, is the essence of courage. The tragedy of Severus Snape is that no one alive could truly appreciate what he did. He lived despised, died despised, and only in memory was he finally seen clearly. But it was exactly that anonymity he chose, the certainty that Lily would never know what he had done for her son, that made his sacrifice so complete. He walked into the darkness and stayed there so others could see the dawn. For Gryffindor, courage was the point. For Snape, it was the punishment and the absolution all at once.